Rick, what about the potential adverse impact from already highly indebted countries such as Italy that may knock down the next wave of dominoes in the global economy?
I think that's a real risk. I think that's a real risk. When I use the phrase anti-fragile, your listeners would be well advised to Google Nassim Taleb and read his work, because that's where the concept fragile and anti-fragile in my usage comes from. There are a lot of a lot of fragile institutions worldwide as a consequence of 3 decades of easy money, Italy just being one. Unfortunately for the Italians, and probably fortunately for the rest of the world, the Italians don't have access to a printing press. They need to convince the EU to continue to subsidize their spending habits at the expense of German savers. Americans are much more fortunate. We don't have to spend or save. All we have to do is counterfeit. And there are other circumstances around the world where there are where there are spenders, aggregation of spenders, sometimes called companies, sometimes called countries, that don't have the ability that the United States has to counterfeit endlessly. And those will certainly be, in the near term, much more fragile institutions. My suspicion is in Europe, too, that the average citizen wants the big thinkers to get them through this, that the average person in Europe doesn't want to be confronted with an Italian default or a Greek default, or much, much, much worse, a French default. Given that savers in Germany don't want to be stolen from in the near term, which would be the alternative, my suspicion is that the European central banks will follow the lead of the American central banks and steal from their children's savings by debasing the euro to keep less competitive countries in the south of Europe solvent. Will they succeed or not is a really interesting question. And I think that really goes to the confidence of the citizenry. Can the big thinkers of the world convince the citizens that liquidity, which is to say cash, is a substitute for solvency? Solvency and liquidity are very different. I was taught a poem as a young man that I'd like to recite for your listeners that goes to this. When your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep becomes your downfall. A circumstance where we have lived beyond our means as a society, which some societies have done for a very long time, calls into question our continued ability to do that. So to the extent that we finance this crisis, what we do is make the next crisis worse.